Has anyone realized that when you fast, when you're hungry, you become a lot more angrier? All the time, yeah. Has anyone realized that when we fast, when we become hungry, we become angry? Yeah? More often than not. Because I've been extremely angry the last 3 weeks since I started fasting. Has anyone heard the word hangry, especially with the girls? Yeah, hangry. When you're hungry and angry at the same time because you're angry because you're hungry. So why is it that we become angry when we're hungry? Because it feels uncomfortable. Yeah? Anyone else? We're not satisfied? It's different. We feel uncomfortable. We're not satisfied. But we're used to being satisfied. We're used to having everything in front of us. We're used to having the best foods. We're used to eating like kings. But when we don't eat, we become angry. It's like we have everything in the tip of our fingers. We have McDonald's, Apollo's, any food that we want. And if we don't get it, we become angry. So it's very easy to be happy when you're full. It's very easy to be happy when everyone else around you is happy. It's very easy to smile when everyone is smiling. It's very easy to be satisfied and happy when you're being treated like a king your whole life. But if that's the case, do we get to know who we really are? If we're always satisfied, we never get to know who we really are. So what happens when all these go away? What happens when people stop smiling? And what happens when we get hungry? What happens when we don't eat? We become angry. So when we're hungry, and no one is treating us right, we find who we really are. We find out who we really are when someone explained it as we're at our base. When we're hungry, we find out who we really are. And when we find out who we really are, we know all our flaws and we can know how to control it. Because if you get to control being angry when you're hungry, it's a lot easier to control your anger when you're out of the fast. So I think it's normal to be angry, but how do we control anger? So I think that's my question. How do we control anger?
You can maybe say a prayer.
Oh, that's perfect. You can say a prayer. Look, I don't have much more than this, but what I did put 3 little points, and plus it is a Bible study, so I get some verses out. So when we're angry, when we're angry, we can control it by a prayer or saying a psalm that we memorized. If someone's really, really annoying you and you're really, really angry and you don't know what to do, maybe keep reciting a psalm that you memorized before and then just wait until the anger goes away. In Proverbs 16, Proverbs chapter 16, verse 32. I'll get it out. My phone's frozen. Andrew, can you read Proverbs chapter 16, verse 32?
He who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city.
Yeah. So when we control our anger, it says in the Bible, it's better than someone who leads a whole army to take away a city. So if we control ourselves, it's better than controlling a city. So that's my first point. Second is we always stay silent when we're angry. in Psalms, I wrote this one down on my computer. So in Psalms chapter 4, verse 4, it says, "Be angry, but do not sin. Meditate within your hearts on your bed and be still." A different version says, do not sin by letting anger control you. Think about it overnight and remain silent. So the second way to control anger is just remain silent. You can be angry, but just remain silent. And third is understand that anger only causes you harm. In Psalms chapter 37, verse 8, it says, "Cease from anger and forsake wrath. It only causes harm." St. Macarius the Great says, "If you rebuke someone and do it in anger, you have allowed a passion to control you. You have not saved anyone and destroyed yourself." Do you have any questions? Any questions? Yes, Angie. Yeah.
Is it bad to pray when we are angry?
Is it bad to pray when we're angry? I think that's a very good question. And I think it's very important, because if we can pray when we're angry, we've really mastered our anger. So when we're praying during our anger, that's when we have mastered it. Thank you very much.
Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So we're doing the book of Tobit, chapter 6. So we will use, if we can, I'm aware that my brother a couple of weeks ago came out and said we shouldn't, he wanted to use the Orthodox Study Bible version of this chapter, but I'm going to go against him. I'm going to use the Coptic Reader version. And I'll explain why as we go through. But if you can get it out on Coptic Reader, because that's the one we'll be reading today. And we're going to talk about chapter 6. So again, I don't know how much you guys remember from the last few weeks, but I'll do a bit of a quick introduction to the book of Tobit again, because it's been a learning experience for me reading about it, going through it, and I'll explain why it was a learning experience for me, like it hopefully was for you guys as well. It's one of the what we call Deuterocanonical books, or the second canonical books. So it's we consider it part of our canon, okay, part of the Orthodox canon. The Catholic Church also has it part of the canon, but the Protestant churches don't, because it's not in some of the Jewish canons. So therefore, it was excluded, and that's why. And the majority of the Bibles that we use in the English language is the Protestant translations, because they've done a lot of work in doing actually very good translations, but we read from the Protestant translations. So you won't find this in most traditional Bibles that we use. Once we started using the Orthodox Study Bible, that's when we started getting a bit more familiar with some of these Deuterocanonical books, because it was included. So that's why most of us don't know much about it, including myself. So the second canon, Old Testament books not found in the Hebrew scriptures. They were also, a lot of them were also found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which they were discovered recently, but they're dated to about 150 BC, 150 before Christ. And much of what we know, and the reason why we insist on them being canonical, and the Orthodox Church has always insisted on being canonical, is a lot of the stuff that we know from tradition, that we think we know just randomly, actually comes from the Deuterocanonical books. Okay, so even this book, as I read the book of Tobit cover to cover, okay, the last few days, I found so many echoes of what the New Testament, so many echoes of when Christ was teaching. where he would have been pointing to things in the book of Tobit. So there's a lot in there that is part of what we understand of our religion, but they're there and we may not have ever read them. So that's the Deuterocanonical books. The book of Tobit itself is set in the year around 720 BC, so 720 years before Christ. After the northern kingdom, so quick history of Israel. Does everyone remember the history of Israel? I've been listening to the book of Tobit for 6 weeks now. I'm hoping you guys have a bit of an understanding of where it sits. But basically, God created man. Man went wrong. He starts again with Noah. He starts again with Abraham. He starts again after the Tower of Babel, because he's trying to create a line for himself of pure people. And the people keep going wrong, and he keeps starting again. At some point, the people beg for a king. He allows them to have a king. He gives them King Saul, who's supposed to be a really good king. King Saul goes wrong. He starts again with David. After David dies, his children, and then he has Solomon becomes king. The children fight over the kingdom, or like there's a rebellion. And then after a short period of time, there's 2 kingdoms, north and south. Yep. Then when you read the book of Kings and Chronicles, it goes through all those kings. And in the northern kingdom, which is the capital was like Samaria, there was not one good king all that time. And at some point in its history, much before the southern kingdom, it gets cut off. It gets taken over by the Assyrians. Okay, and it's never to return again. Later on, the southern kingdom also gets cut off, but they continue and come back in Nehemiah's time, Ezra's time. Okay, so that's a big, broad view of the Bible. So the northern kingdom, once they're taken by the Assyrians. The southern is taken by the Babylonians. The northern is taken by the Assyrians. So this book is set in that time after they've been taken by the Assyrians. So they're in captivity. Okay, so the book is set in captivity. In the same way that Esther, the book of Esther, is set in captivity. Okay? The book of Daniel is set in captivity, but Daniel is from the southern kingdom. It's in Babylonian captivity. So they're set, some of these books are set in, not in Israel as in their glory days as they're building a kingdom. It's set after they've been captured. And same with the prophets as well. Okay? It's amongst the historical books, although it's very much like the wisdom literature in the way it's written. Okay? So there's prayers and prophecies and things like that within the book of Tobit. Okay? Any questions about that so far? All right. The book of Tobit is a very interesting book. The story is very interesting. I don't know if anyone summarized the whole story for you, because chapter 6 is only like halfway through, but I'm going to ruin the whole story. I'm going to tell you the whole story of the book of Tobit. Okay? Just so we can get a picture of where we're up to, because it's a very interesting story. Okay, so it tells the story, it tells the story of a righteous Israelite man named Tobit, okay, living in Nineveh. So he's in Nineveh is the capital of the Assyrian Empire. After their deportation, around the year 721 BC. And the first 2.5 chapters are written in the first person. So Tobit is writing about himself. We did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. Okay? This man, Tobit, was a very righteous man. So he's amongst the Assyrians, but he does things like he wants to maintain the law of Israel. He doesn't like the fact that someone dies and they're not buried properly, or they're not cleansed properly, or they're not looked after properly. So he does that, okay? And he goes and does all these righteous things, and he gets dobbed in at some point for doing that, and then he runs off into exile to not be executed for being righteous. After the king dies, the next king comes along. I can't remember the name. So Sennacherib was the guy who was going to kill him. There was the one after him. I can't remember his name. Allowed him to come back and to continue his... and so when he came back, he wasn't allowed to necessarily continue what he was doing, but he did it again. After he did it again one time, okay, he goes out onto a mountain and a bird poos in his eyes, okay? And then he goes blind and there's a white film over his eyes. Okay, does everyone remember the story so far? Because all that has happened already in the last 5 chapters. So you should be familiar with that, okay? And then he goes blind. He's so upset by being blind. It's put a strain on his marriage. He's fighting with his wife. And then he prays to die. He says, God, kill me now. I'd rather be dead. So he has this prayer that he'd rather be dead. Once he's in the middle of this prayer, he remembers, oh, actually, there's a guy in another town who owes me a lot of money. I might as well collect that money. So he sends off his son to go collect the money. While he's praying his prayer, I want to die, just before he sends off his son, there's another lady in another town also praying a prayer, a lady called Sarah. She's praying that God kill me now as well because I can't get a husband. Every time I try and get a husband, before we can consummate the marriage, so they go into the marriage chamber, the guy dies. 7 times, the guy dies. And their interpretation of this event is that there's a demon called Asmodeus that kills off any guy that wants to sleep with her or any husband because the demon is jealous of her. He loves her. Okay? And that you can start to see echoes of, you know, some of the Greek mythology and things like that. Because a lot of stories like that are very similar to Persian and Greek mythology. All right, so you have these 2 people that want to die and 2 people in a bad situation. And then Tobit sends off his son, who is Tobias. Okay, so Tobit's son is Tobias. Sends him off, go collect that money and bring it back. Yep. As he's leaving, he needs a companion on his travels. So last chapter, there's a guy who comes and says, my name is Azarias, I'm going with you on the tour. Okay, on this journey. Who is that? Didn't remember who that was? Who was that? Who was Azarias? This guy that said, I'm going to go on the tour, this journey with you. Archangel Raphael. Okay, Archangel Raphael goes on this journey with Tobias, disguised as a human. Okay, so they're going off now to go find the money. On the way, as they go off to find the money, Tobias goes into a river, and this is the chapter we're going to talk about today. Goes into a river to bathe himself, and then a fish jumps out to eat Tobias. Tobias gets scared, and then the angel says, don't be scared, catch the fish. He catches the fish thrashes about a bit. I'm giving details because these are in the chapter, and I'm going to comment on them spiritually. The fish thrashes about a little bit, and then the angel says, don't be afraid, cut out its organs, keep them, okay, and then let's kill the rest of the fish and eat it. So they eat the rest of the fish, and then Tobias says, why did we kill that fish and keep its organs? The angel says, look, those organs are going to help. If you burn them in a certain way, they'll help someone against demons, and if you use this ointment in a certain way, it will help someone with their blindness. So okay, good. So then they continue their journey. As they go along, Archangel Raphael says to Tobias, come, let's stay at this house, who happens to be a kinsman of Tobias. It also happens to be the house of this lady called Sarah. And so the archangel says to him, when you go into this house, you're going to ask for this lady's hand. You have the right to her wealth. You have the right to this family because you're the closest kinsman, and she'll accept. And so, and then Tobias says, well, actually, I've heard about this lady, and if I try and sleep with her, I'm going to get killed like those other 7 guys. He says, don't worry, you'll be all good. And then while Tobias is trying to, he marries her, okay? And then because he has to have 14 days of this wedding feast, he sends off Archangel Raphael to go collect the money. Archangel Raphael goes, gets the money, comes back. They go happily back to Tobit, the father, and then they give him the money. They say some nice prayers. Tobit dies, and then Tobias goes back and lives in Media, where he met his wife. Okay, everyone got the story? That's the story of Tobit. Okay, if you read it, that's the gist of what you're going to get. Okay, some details in between, but that's the gist of the story. Good? Okay, so we're going to talk about chapter 6. Chapter 6 is some of those events. Okay, not all of them. Again, we said it sits amongst the historical books during the exile. It is closely related to Jewish wisdom literature. As I said before, there's prayers and prophecies and things like that, and it's very similar to some of the Jewish wisdom literatures. There's a lot of teachings on morality within the book, okay, about the idea of obeying the law, of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. So when you read about Tobit and the way that his almsgiving is accepted, it sounds very similar to the way that Cornelius is accepted in Acts. So as I said to you before, there's a lot of echoes that you read in the New Testament. the idea of doing unto others as you have them do to you, that is in Tobit, and then Christ kind of paraphrases that later on. There's teachings in this chapter on the purity of marriage, okay, and the purity of the marriage bed, which we're going to talk about this chapter. And so you'll find Tobit is read in Catholic weddings, okay, so teachings on purity come from this, and also the idea of the guardian angels, the idea of intercessions of the angels, the intercessions of the idea of care for your family, reverence for the dead. A lot of these ideas come from this book, Tobit. Also, this is from the Orthodox Study Bible. The commentary at the beginning of Tobit says that Tobit is seen as a story of Christ in the church. Okay, so it's seen as symbolic of Christ in the church. So a father sends his only son into the world so that he may find a bride, save her, and bring her back rejoicing to his parents. The same story is told by the Lord in John 3:16. The idea that God sent his only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, into the world to save the world, the church, and then take the church back to himself. So we're going to comment a little bit on that as we go along as well, this idea of Tobit being an image of Christ in the church. All right, we're ready to start reading. Has everyone got it open in front of them? Anyone got any comments so far? Okay. So again, I'm going to read the Orthodox Study Bible. The reason why I chose the Orthodox Study Bible, the Coptic Reader version, is that as I was going through this chapter, and there were certain verses in there that I was reading commentaries on, I found that the early church fathers were commenting on things that were not in the Orthodox Study Bible version. Okay, so there's two versions going along. They're both kind of from the same source. They're both, I think, from the Septuagint, but there's different translations that have come along later on. And when the fathers comment on the book of Tobit, they're commenting on this version, the Coptic Reader version. So there's things in here that I was like, why are they commenting on this? That's not what it says. I couldn't understand until I read this version. I realized, it's because it is here. Like the thrashing about of the fish and the dog and things like that. All right. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. So we'll read verse 1 of chapter 6. And so Tobias continued on, and the dog was following him, and he stayed at the first stopping point near the river Tigris. Okay, so as I said, we're at the point in the story where Tobit has now sent out his son to go collect the money that's owed to them as a family, and he's got Archangel Raphael going along with him, and he's called himself Azarias. Okay, and we saw in halfway through last chapter that when they left, the dog followed them. Okay, and then in chapter 1, verse 1 of the next chapter, again, as they're going along, the dog's just kind of there. Okay, and so it's very interesting. I don't know its full significance, but I'll give you some of the commentaries that I read about it. Something that happened today, my son is doing an Explorer project at school, and he's doing it on Matthew Flinders. Matthew Flinders was one of the early explorers that came from England to Australia to navigate the coastline of Australia. And one of the interesting facts that him and some of the other boys in his class are going to put in their presentation is the fact that Matthew Flinders took his cat with him. Okay, so it must be a thing. It must be a thing when people go on journeys to take their animals. And I guess if I went on a journey, I'd take my dog with me, protection and things. So, commentary on the dog. Some of the fathers comment on the dog. Okay, they comment on the significance of the dog. Number one, St. Ambrose says that dogs bark to protect their master. And so they have the integrity to, when they're uncomfortable with what's happening with their master, that they'll bark to protect and to don't let anything bad happen to their master. He says that then so should we use our mouths to protect the people of God and to protect justice and to make sure you use your mouth. If dogs are even going to do that, why shouldn't humans do that for their master? So that's the first thing St. Ambrose says. St. Ambrose also says that dogs are not lazy. They work hard for their master. He says dogs are loyal. And they, by the way, both him and St. Basil say this in the context of shame on us as humans that we wouldn't behave even as good as a dog. That they're loyal. He says dogs are grateful. When their master gives them something, they're grateful to be with their master. St. Basil says dog's instinct keeps him focused on his pathway. So his instincts and his sense of smell, he's always focused on where he's trying to get to. If he's trying to get food, he goes for it. And us as humans, we get distracted easily. We're not confused by which pathway to take. Even a dog knows where to go. So that's their commentaries on the dog. Spiritual commentary from that, I'll say, try and do some of these characteristics from dogs. All right, now let's read verse 2 to 6. And he went out to wash his feet, and behold, an immense fish came out to devour him. And Tobias, being frightened of it, cried out with a loud voice, saying, Sir, it is attacking me. And the angel said to him, Catch it by the gills and draw it to you. And when he had done so, he pulled it onto dry land, and it began to thrash before his feet. Then the angel said to him, Disembowel this fish, and put aside his heart and his gall and his liver for yourself, for those things are necessary as useful medicine. And when he had done so, he roasted its flesh, and they took it with them on the way. The rest they salted, so that it might be sufficient for them, until they would arrive at Rajes, a city of the Medes. Okay, so now we'll comment on this fish. So he's walking along, the fish tries to eat him, and he gets scared, and then he says to the angel, the fish is going to eat me, and then they catch the fish. Okay, I read actually two different fathers had two different polar opposite opinions on this, but I'll go with one of them because it kind of makes a little bit more sense for me. St. Augustine actually said that the fish represents Christ, and so from the fish and the guts and the gall and the liver and all that, there was healing. Bede, another father, Latin father, he says that actually the fish represents the devil. Okay, that in this story actually Tobias, the son, represents Christ, and the fish represents the devil. And the devil, of course, coming, and so Tobias is in this river, and he's being, the flowing river, and so there's only one direction for humanity, which is death. And Christ is quickly heading towards death, and which is the fish. And then, of course, and he willingly puts himself in that pathway. And then, of course, he is saved from, or he tramples on death. And from death comes life. Okay? I think that makes a bit more sense. And so in this setting, Bede says that actually the fish represents the devil, trying to kill Christ, trying to stop him from his path. And Christ overcomes that death, and from that victory comes life, which is exactly what happens in this, or healing. And then there's an interesting thing that he says that Tobias was frightened. Again, that's one of the things that's not in the Orthodox Study Bible, that Tobias was frightened. And the fathers comment on that idea that he was frightened. Why was he frightened? Is Christ frightened from death? And so Bede says that actually think about the Garden of Gethsemane, when Christ was distressed, praying and bleeding, he sweat like blood coming out of him, that he prayed to the Father, may this cup be removed from me. So he's saying, remember that there's a different kind of trembling. That trembling that he had was not fear in the sense of, oh, I'm scared. It's more he has to carry the burden of the sin of the world. And then the fish, as I said, thrashed about. So as he tried to catch it, again, that's not in the Orthodox Study Bible, but the fish thrashed about. The devil fights. When something good is happening, the devil will always fight you. You have to expect it. You know that the devil fights. Anyone who's ever caught a fish, they're ferocious in the way they thrash about. And that's why whoever wrote the book of Tobit wrote it that way, is to make us understand that the devil will always fight you. He's never going to let it go easily. You're never going to do good in your life. You're never going to make a decision to serve God. You're never going to make a decision to fast without getting angry. You're not going to make a decision to leave a relationship without the devil pulling you back in when it's the wrong relationship. You're never going to make a decision to stop watching something that's dirty, and you don't get the imagination pushing you to keep watching. You're not going to make a decision not to be angry, and no one's going to provoke you. It's not going to happen. The devil's going to fight you. So as the devil tries to fight you, you're meant to resist. Okay? Always the devil is going to fight against what is good. And then, of course, the fish becomes a pathway to healing. Okay, so once Christ has overcome, or Tobit has overcome, or you push through a certain temptation, then comes victory or salvation or healing or whatever that comes from the fish. So that's some of the commentary on the fish. We'll just read verse 7 and 9, which is also related. Just to comment on something else about the fish. Then Tobias questioned the angel, and he said to him, I implore you, brother Azariah. So remember, Archangel Raphael is Azariah. To tell me what remedies these things hold, which you have told me to retain from the fish. And the angel answering said to him, if you put a little piece of its heart on burning coals, its smoke will drive away all kinds of demons, whether from a man or from a woman, so that they will no longer approach them. And the gall is useful for anointing the eyes, in which there may be a white speck, and they will be cured. Okay, so we know where this is headed, because we know the story. We know that the father's struggling with his white in his eye, and we know the lady's got a demon that kills all these guys that come and try and sleep with her. So we know where he's headed to that. But what's the contemplation on it is that God will always turn bad to good. Even the wickedness of this fish or the devil can be turned in your life to good. Every problem you have will be turned into good. Every tribulation will be turned into good. That's the work of God. Everything gets turned into good. So Ambrosiasta, he's commenting, says, even if tribulations arise for a time through Satan's maneuvers, he's commenting here also on Tobit, the fact that Tobit himself has lost his eyes even though he's doing good. And then he's commenting that with time comes consolation and glory. He says, so even if tribulations arise for a time through Satan's maneuvers, the examples of holy men teach us that these things are permitted by God only for the sake of increasing our rewards. Because if we bear tribulations with composure, we shall here be given consolation with effect, and in the future we shall be given eternal life with glory. So he's saying, when you suffer here, don't be scared. Don't be worried about problems. Don't be worried about bad things that come your way. Bear them, he says, with composure. Don't lose your innocence because you're being provoked. Don't lose your innocence because you're being tempted. Bear the problems. So even if I feel like something's been done wrong against me, don't lose your innocence. Bear it with composure, because in the end it will come to your glory. So if you're being hard done by, bear it with composure. Don't become angry. Don't become self-justified. Don't trample on other people. For example, at work, you feel like your boss is not treating you right. So then I become just as nasty to him as he is to me. I've lost my innocence. I'm not bearing with composure. The end is not glory for me. Whereas if I just bear with composure, you will have consolation with effect here, and in the future we have eternal glory. So don't be afraid of problems, of even sin. Even sin. Even my sin can be turned to me for good. If I bear it with composure and I keep struggling against it, everything will be turned to your good with due time and done with the right attitude. And so that's the the fish, if it represents the devil, became a source of healing in the hands of God. Everything in the hands of God becomes a source of healing for you and for those around you. Okay, now we'll read verses 10 to 13. And Tobias said to him, where do you prefer that we stay? And the angel responding said, here is one named Raguel, a man closely related to you from your tribe. And he has a daughter named Sarah, but he has no other male or female except her. All his livelihood is dependent upon you, and you ought to take her to yourself in marriage. Therefore ask for her from her father, and he will give her to you as wife. So, again, commenting on some of this, like from a spiritual allegorical perspective. Raguel here, the uncle, so this is Tobias's uncle. So he's going in, and the angel says, come, let's stay in this guy's house, who happens to be Tobias's uncle, whose name is Raguel. He represents the Gentiles. So if Christ is Tobias moving out into the world to find Sarah, who represents the church, and bring her back, he's going out to save all. That's why Raguel here, even though he's a Jewish person but he represents here Gentiles. He's there to save all. Christ is not specific to a group of people. He's not specific to a particular nationality like the Jews thought. The Messiah is only going to be for the Jewish people. As some of us unfortunately think, within cultural context, well, Christ is only here for the Coptic church or for the Greek church or for the Catholic church Christ is for everyone. Christ is for all people. And the church, when he goes to bring the church to himself, he goes to bring everyone as part of the church. And that's part of the work of Christ. So always keep that in our minds when we think about the work of God in the world and for us within the church. And so Sarah here represents the church. And so BD says, Raguel stands for the people of the Gentiles, whom the Lord deigned to visit through his preachers in order to take himself a bride from their stock, that is, make of the Gentiles a church for himself. Okay, and remember that the church in the early church was actually majority Gentiles. It wasn't majority Jews. It was a majority Gentiles. Also, Sarah's name befits the church because of Sarah, the patriarch Abraham's wife, who bore Isaac, the son of the promise, that is, the free people of the church. So Sarah represents the church who Christ is bringing to himself. And so the reason why I say that, I want you to just keep that image. I don't know how to go back, but anyway, the image of Christ in the church as Tobias and this lady, because that's going to give us the same teaching that St. Paul gives us about purity, about the husband and wife, about the marriage. The same teaching St. Paul gives the image of Christ in the church, his husband and wife. And so again, this imagery will then teach us a little bit as we get to the end of the chapter about purity. So read verse 14 and 15 before we get there. Then Tobias responded and said, I hear that she has been given to 7 husbands, and they passed away. But I have even heard this, that a demon killed them. Therefore I am afraid lest this may happen to me also, and since I am the only child of my parents, I might send their old age with sorrow to the grave. So Tobias says, everyone that's married this lady that you're asking me to marry gets killed. So I don't want to get killed. I'm scared to get killed like one of them. But he gives a reason. He says, actually, the reason why I'm scared is not for my own sake, but it's because I couldn't bear to have my parents see me die at such a young age, because they'll be miserable, which they will be. You read the rest of the book of Tobit, they get scared because it takes so long to come back. Of course, the first thought you think when he's saying that, he's just making excuses, like he's just too scared, so he thinks he's blaming it on his parents. But of course, 2 lessons. One, remember not to judge people. Even though we think that maybe there's some alternate reason here, maybe he's genuine, and I'm sure he is genuine about his reasons. That's really why. So don't judge people's motivations. Number 2 is one of the reasons why I think that he's genuine in this is that he shares the righteousness of his father. His father is so righteous, and he sacrifices himself for the sake of others. Surely Tobias has learnt the same thing from his father, and so that's why you can be sure that he actually only cares about his parents, not himself. And again, of course, if he represents Christ, he's not there to be selfish. All right, now we'll read 16 to 22. So we'll read the rest of the chapter. And this part is slightly different to the Orthodox Study Bible version. So if you read it, it's similar message, but it's actually slightly different. So yeah, feel free to read the other version so you can get both images. But this one here has a little bit more detail about what Archangel Raphael says to Tobias. Then the angel Raphael said to him, listen to me, and I will reveal to you who they are over whom the demon can prevail. So he's saying, be careful, not anyone. The demon can't kill anyone. Only some people they can kill. For example, those who receive marriage in such manner as to exclude God from themselves and from their mind, and in such a manner as to empty themselves to their lust, like the horse and mule, which have no understanding over them the devil has power. Okay, so those people, the devil has power. But you, when you will have accepted her, enter the bedroom and for 3 days keep yourself continent from her and empty yourself to nothing other than prayers with her. Moreover, on that night, burn the liver of fish like incense, and the demon will be put to flight. In truth, on the 2nd night, you will become ready to receive a physical union like that of the holy patriarchs. And then on the 3rd night, you will obtain a blessing, so that healthy children may be procreated from you both. And so the 3rd night, having been accomplished, you will receive the virgin with the fear of the Lord, led more by love of children than by physical desire, so that, as the offspring of Abraham, you will then obtain a blessing in children. Okay? So we'll talk about some of that. But remember I said that Christ in the church is the image of marriage that is given to us by St. Paul, and again is given to us in this context that Tobias represents Christ and Sarah represents the church. And so St. Paul also used this language to say that the two are reserved for one another. Okay? The two are reserved for one another. They're not for any other purpose. They're not for anyone else. They're just for one another. Okay? And so that's why it lends us to so many lessons on purity, because that understanding gives us why we believe certain things about purity. First lesson on purity, that God is not present in impurity. God does not protect, as this says, the impure. Those who went to this marriage, so earlier Archangel Raphael said this girl is very good looking. So a lot of these men, it seems, wanted to marry her just because she's good looking. So they're just chasing their lust. And so God did not look after them. So when there's impurity, God does not look after them. It's like mutually exclusive. You want a relationship with God, purity blocks it. You want protection from God, impurity blocks it. The opposite is also true. God will look after those who are pure. If you are pure, you maintain your purity, or you work hard for your purity, God will look after you. Okay, that's what he's saying here. You, if you're continent, God will be with you. Okay, be careful. It's a big temptation, by the way. It's not that he's not facing temptation. That's his wife in the bedchamber with him. He has every right to sleep with her, but he says, don't. 3 days, you pray. So that's not easy. It's a challenge to his purity. But he does it, yeah. Yeah, so 3 days is obviously, there's many, you're right, it's always 3. 3 or 40, you get 40, you get 3. So numbers are symbolic in the Bible, and they often have meaning. I think it points to the Trinity, so the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. It's a symbol of completion. It's always been seen because it represents the Trinity. So I think that's one of the main reasons. Why specifically 3 days? He said I don't know, but I think it would be symbolic of that. So he says 3 days, don't sleep with her, and I'll look after you. And so that's what he does. Okay, so understand that, especially as young people growing up in our society, those that care for their purity, God will look after them. Those that don't care for their purity, it's like you can't be there with God. God cannot be with you. It's like mutually exclusive. So be aware of that. First lesson on purity. Second lesson on purity, God did not allow Sarah to sleep with anyone else before she was with Tobias. Okay? When you read one of the versions, the dad, when he's commenting, says, after they've slept with her, they die. But actually, it seems like, and some of the commentaries from the fathers, and even from what she herself said, is that I'm innocent of all these men. Because people said she must have strangled them. People said that but she said, I'm innocent. But when she said innocent, it's not that she just didn't kill them. She also didn't sleep with them. The marriage was not consummated because it was only for Tobias. And the angel says, do not fear for yourself, for she has been prepared for you from of old. So we have to take our purity seriously, because God prepares me for someone and prepares someone for me. Until that is brought together by God in marriage, I'm no one else's, and that person is no one else's. So care for your purity. Aim always to maintain your purity. If I've made a mistake with my purity, aim to always restore your purity. God restores it. But don't be negligent with your purity. God cares. He really cares. And He really cares for the person that you are to be with, for their sake. So don't take it lightly. Don't think it's nothing, because our world convinces us that purity doesn't matter. It convinces us that it's not a big deal by telling us that everyone does it and doesn't matter anymore. Who cares? And the temptation is strong. You put those two things together, we start justifying anything. We start allowing ourselves. In 2,000 years of history, almost some cultures did, but most cultures always had a problem with this idea of being loose with my purity. It was always considered a virtue to maintain my purity. It was considered something righteous, something that the society really loved in a person, like courage. But it's been thrown out the window now, but for God it matters. And we are being held for someone, specifically sexual purity. So even if I've made a mistake with my purity, restore it and maintain it. If I am lucky enough to still have my purity, keep it. Keep it until God gives it to someone else. It's not yours to give. It's God's to give. In this case, it doesn't say that you've prepared her for yourself. It says that she has been prepared for you. Who's prepared her? God has prepared her. So if you want that gift from God, then you yourself be a gift for someone else. And then God will also be preparing you for someone. So take it seriously. Don't take it as something light. Just because society tells us it's light does not mean it is. It is something very, very important. So we try as best we can to maintain our purity. Impurity can even tarnish marriage. So as I said, those men came into the marriage for lust. For lust. And so God did not accept that, and those men had to die. I'm not saying God was necessarily as moany as the devil in this. I don't know what the story is with this demon that's killing, whether it's symbolic or real, I can't comment. But impurity can tarnish marriage, and especially if my marriage is not exclusive. So I allow myself my imagination, my eyes, what I watch, even in marriage. So don't think the battle ends with marriage. Purity is something that I should maintain even in my marriage. Okay, so it can even tarnish marriage. And so the marriage should be founded on mutual prayer and love. Mutual prayer and love and respect. It shouldn't be based on lust. And any marriage that is based on lust, it's doomed to fail. It always will fail. It will never not fail. If I'm just going into this marriage because I find the person attractive and nothing else matters to me, and all I care about, and by the way, it muddies the waters when a young couple, before they're married, allow themselves a sexual relationship, because then they're blinded to everything else they should be looking for in the process of the engagement period to get married. So don't allow yourself to be blinded. It can tarnish even the marriage bed, so be careful. And so in this case, he held himself for 3 days from her, and she held herself, and they prayed, and they followed this process of burning the incense, and then they started their relationship together. So like everything important in life, it is a lifelong battle. It is something that we fight all our lives to maintain, to care for our purity. Don't let it be something that we neglect and don't care about. Okay, and don't think the battle ends just because I'm married. No, it doesn't. I have to sustain that purity all my life. That's the end of the chapter. Any questions or comments that anyone wants to bring up about this chapter? So as I said, the book of Tobit is a very interesting book. Very interesting stories in it. Yep. I don't have a good answer for that. I don't know why specifically the heart and the gall. I think the gall from fish, maybe that's where they get fish oils and things, because one commentator was saying that that's where a lot of medicines come from. The heart of the fish, again, some of the fathers commented on like spiritually, like, but I wasn't convinced by anything, so I didn't put it in there. So I don't know why specifically and what the demon, the story goes that when they did that, then the angel flees to Upper Egypt. So I don't know why Upper Egypt. So that's where the devil goes. And then the angel chases, Archangel Raphael chases the demon to Upper Egypt and binds him. So it shows the power of the devil. It shows the cosmic battles that are happening between God and Satan, and angels and the devils and things. But again, that's things not really beyond it's beyond our understanding. We don't really understand too much detail about it. We're just getting glimpses here. So whether that demon is symbolic and why specifically they had to, I can't comment. Just like, anyway. So I don't know. Any other comments or questions? Thank you for listening. God bless you.